It's been years since I did an updated soil mix video. I do prefer to mix my own soil for really one reason. It's much easier for me to add and subtract certain ingredients to benefit specific plants or cater more toward my care tendencies. I kind of have my basic mix, which is 3 ingredients I like to do, and then from there I will add or keep out different additives to benefit the specific plant. Generally speaking, I am an underwaterer. I used to be an overwaterer, but once my collection got to a certain point, I wasn't able to water my plants as often just because there's so many of them. So I do try to keep my soil mix more moisture retaining these days. So where I do still want an airy mix, I try to use products that are going to hold on to water as well. I will also tell you things you can add or not add if you are an overwaterer. The very first thing I like to use as my soil base is actually cocoa coir, which is this stuff right here. It's soft enough that it retains water a bit, but it is also it doesn't compact down too much. Cocoa coir typically comes in bricks like this that you have to soak underwater, and then once it's been drenched in water, then this is what you end up with. So this bucket here is where I'll be mixing my soil. This is 1 brick of cocoa coir, which has been dampened. It goes quite a long ways. This is very budget friendly, I feel, so that's another reason I really like cocoa coir. The next thing I like to use in my basic mix is cocoa husk, or cocoa chips, I think is what it's most commonly called. So it is just this thicker, kind of hairy additive, and again, this is very affordable as well, so I think it's a great filler. Where it is kind of chunky, the pieces are like this. It definitely adds aeration to the soil mix. The chunks actually also absorb water, so they can hold water, but they're not going to compact down your mix. They will hold on to a bit of water, so I'm just gonna go ahead and add a bit of this, and I just kind of eyeball it. I'll add a little bit and then mix it and see what it looks like. And I will say, actually, with the cocoa chunks, it also normally comes in a brick type thing that I personally like to dampen. I don't know if that's actually how you're supposed to do it, but I do like to wet it, so I'll just let it soak in water for 20 minutes before I go ahead and add it to my mix. When I soak the cocoa coir or cocoa chips, I'll soak it in liquid water so that the nutrients are in the mix already, and I don't have to stress too much about making sure that there's enough nutrients for the plant. So yeah, that is just something I like to do. Here's where we're at with this mix. And I'll just break it up in there. See, it's pretty light, and this is dampened, and it's still this light. The last basic thing I like to add is pumice or perlite. So I do gravitate toward pumice simply because it's a bit heavier and less dusty than perlite. It doesn't break down over time the way perlite does. It's a little bit heavier, like I said. So something that bugs me about perlite is if you water the plant, if the water disrupts the plant, if you're top watering, then the perlite will flow all to the top of the soil, and that makes the soil kind of compact down more than pumice will. But on the flip side, perlite is actually less than half the price. That is definitely a trade-off. Perlite does fine. It's fine, I just don't prefer it. I actually like perlite in my sphagnum moss potting stuff I do, but that's for a different video. And yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and mix that in. Okay, so to help keep the cost down, I'm also going to add in perlite, just because I have so many plants that need potted right now. I'm trying to stretch these supplies. And the pumice doesn't break down over time the way perlite does. Here, I'll show you. This piece in my right hand is perlite, this piece in my left hand is pumice, and I'm going to squeeze them with the same pressure. You see, perlite breaks down. So it is going to break down over time in your soil mix, which means you may have to repot your plant sooner, but it kind of depends. I should have worn a mask. And just mix it up. That's all evenly distributed. This is what we are left with my just basic mix. Looks pretty good. The next thing I like to add is charcoal. If for some reason there's mold or anything like that, this will help to keep that mold from happening, I guess. This is very fine horticultural charcoal. So I just like to add a little bit of that. And again, it just adds a little bit of airiness, not so much airiness that my plants are going to dry out between when I'm able to water them. To help retain a little bit of moisture, I like to add a bit of vermiculite. I use very little of this because it can get kind of expensive, I think, but it is great at moisture retention. So I do like to add a little bit. This is what it looks like. So great moisture retention, and just another way to keep it chunky, but with some moisture retention properties. Like, that really is what I'm going for. I don't want this to be so chunky that it doesn't hold any moisture at all. I'll be honest, I like the look of, like, that's totally not the point of soil, but it definitely, it's definitely more attractive to me when a soil has like a lot of different stuff going on. I don't know, I think it is prettier, which that's such a dumb reason to add like this many supplies, and it's not the only reason I add this many different things to my mix, but it is a reason, I'll be totally honest with you. Next, orchid bark. This is the orchid bark I like to add. There's big pieces and small pieces. Orchid bark can help hold moisture, but it doesn't hold moisture so long that it's going to cause rot. And that's something I will say about the vermiculite. If you add too much of it, it can definitely lead to rot, bacteria, fungus kind of issues. So make sure you're not adding too much of that, because it does, like I said, retain moisture very, very well. Gotta go easy on it, I think, in my opinion. Okay, and just mix that all up. Oh, that looks so pretty, right? That's a huge piece of bark. I'm gonna break that one up. A little bit too big there. And this does last a very long time. So like I did completely run out of my potting mix recently, and I did buy everything that I needed. It was like $150, but it will last me probably 2 years or so. It's gonna go a very long way for me, which I feel like is kind of saying a lot because I do have quite a bit of houseplants. I've been using mosquito bits for so long. These like large jugs go such a long way. It helps keep fungus gnats down. They look like little brown pumices. So another way to just like aerate the soil a bit. I will say you can also sprinkle it on the top of the soil once you've like potted your plant, but I don't like to do that because these are organic matter. That's what attracts the fungus gnat larvae to eat them. So it does get like fuzzy, like moldy, like that's what organic matter does. That's the whole purpose of it. It's supposed to happen, but it is pretty unsightly, I know. So I do like to mix it into the soil this way so that I don't see the mold happening. You could also sprinkle it on top and then press it down into the soil so you don't have to look at it. But again, it's like kill two birds with one stone. You get kind of some aeration that has anti-fungus gnat like benefits. So this is the finished result of I underwater my plants, but I don't want such a dense mix that I'm going to get root rot on a bunch of plants, you know, like it has just the right amount of airiness that it doesn't hold moisture enough that it's going to cause or lead to a lot of root rot, but it is moisture retaining enough that my plants like aren't needing to be watered constantly. That's just not something I can keep up with in this stage of my life. Something you can do when you've mixed your soil to make sure it's not overly compacting is take like a big handful of it so you get a little bit of everything in there. Make sure it's mixed really well, of course. Give it a good squeeze, and if it like sticks together, it might need a little bit more airiness to it. Mine is not clumping together like at all. Well, it has a little bit of clumpiness, but enough that I know it's going to hold in moisture with the cocoa coir. That's just kind of like how I know that I've added the right combination of things. I like it to clump like just a tiny bit, but not so much that like I hold it like this and it just like stays, you know? That's kind of the test I like to run to make sure the mix is to my liking, and it definitely is. If you are somebody that is a chronic overwaterer, I would 100% make sure you leave out vermiculite. Vermiculite just retains moisture. If you're watering your plant constantly, it definitely can cause issues. So that's the number one thing I would leave out. The next thing I would do is add more perlite or pumice. I added just enough that there is a lightness to the soil without it being mostly perlite. So I would add you know, however much perlite. Like you could make the mix literally half perlite if you are a chronic overwaterer. So that's kind of the thing with mixing your own soil. And I mean, you can even do it with like pre-bagged mixes. Honestly, this orchid bark is a pre-bagged mix. It's an orchid mix by Espoma, but I really like it. So it does have like orchid bark and a little bit of pumice in there, but I already like added pumice, so that wasn't the point of adding this. But I do like the chunkiness of that orchid bark compared to some of the other like just orchid bark things I could buy online, or I could buy. So that's why I go for that one. Oh, you could also definitely, if you're an overwaterer, you could definitely add more of the horticultural charcoal to help combat like mold and bacteria and all of that stuff down there in there. It helps keep it a little bit more clean if your soil gets too wet. This is what we have, and I think it looks awesome. This is exactly how I like it. There we go. So I hope that was helpful. Opinions, questions, comments, concerns, please leave them down below. I will do my best to respond to any questions I get. Yeah, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one.